Hey Dylan, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, Jonathan, I'm really happy to be here, and I really am honored that you invited me to come back and talk about this new topic.
Yeah, well, with the previous episode you done in season one with how to do well on a job interview, went down a treat with a lot of the listeners. So I thought, like, we've got to get you back to talk about professional networking. And I've always heard the quote that your network is your net worth. And I don't know if that's become a bit of a cliche within the job searching community or anything like that, but it is very true. And I think I even mentioned on my previous episode that I was able to get in contact with people within um, the super yacht industry through family and professional contacts. And, if I ever choose to leave my job, I've got hopefully another job already lined up. So professional networking is such an important skill, but I think you would agree with me. It's one of those essential skills that are just not taught in school or state education anywhere for some reason. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say today because I learned a lot from that job interview episode. But the very first question I'd like to ask is, what is professional networking and why is it an essential skill?
Well, I think we got to go with the second question first, right? Like, why
Okay.
is networking an essential skill? There is a trope that getting a job is not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And so that right there is the value of professional networking. And this extends so much further beyond just the job market. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But then the question is, okay, so if that's true, that I need to network to get a job, then the question becomes, what is that networking? So the way that I would define a professional network is it's a group of contacts and people that you have good terms with, right? They're either friends, relations, former coworkers, but there's somebody that you can call up and ask a favor from. Okay, and that's a pretty shallow definition, but let's just kind of flush that out. When I graduated from university, I started in the mortgage industry, so I was selling home loans here in the United States, and it's there I learned skills. Well, okay, so what do I need to do to bring business in the door? I got to know real estate agents, I got to know tax professionals, I got to know title people, I got to know appraisers, I got to know contractors and construction people. How do you find that? Well, you got to go out and actually make those contacts. So I started there, and that's where I started working. Then we had the crash. I went from there. My mortgage company collapsed, and then I started working in security. How did I get that job? And I'll get to there in a second, but I got it through networking. Then I went from security into education, and then I went from education into accounting. And in every step of the way, I was calling on people from my previous life to help me get the life that I was going to. And so when you start thinking about your network is everything. Your network is everyone. Your network is everything that you interact with. And so the thing about our current climate with COVID that scares me most is that most people's networks, or what they think of their networks, are their coworkers, right? And now what's happening? People are working from home. We don't have that face-to-face contact. So how do you build a network? And for me personally, this became a really big question because at my current job, my number one task, and this is what my boss told me day one. I said, I sat down with my new boss. I started in January of 2020. And I said, hey, I want to be the best auditor you've ever had. How do I do that? What's the number one thing you need from me to really excel at this job? And he looked at me and said, you need to have a network in the company. And so right there, I was like, okay, how do I do that? He's like, I don't know, but you need to know everybody. If I ask you, who in IT can help us with this problem, I need you to know somebody. If I ask you who can tell us about this transmission or these federal tariffs or international supply chains, you need to know who those people are and you need to figure it out. And I can't tell you who they are because I don't know who they are. He's like, but for me and the value of the company, that's the number one thing. So then how do you do that when you're working from home? that
Yeah.
became the challenge.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at networking, I gave kind of a brief overview of my working life, but I can tell you that just like with the job interview, there are skills that translate over into every single one of those facets. Well, now it's a case of I'm still using those people. I'm still using those contacts, um, and I had to. It's a network isn't anything that you can just make. The network is a 10, 15-year project, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
It's something that you have to start from day one. So I mean, I'm just kind of filibustering here, but I'm going to keep going if you don't mind.
No, please
Um,
continue.
so your focus as kids on you in university are turning age 18. Okay, so this kid is coming out of high school. I think it's called secondary for you guys, but I don't
Yes, yeah.
actually know. Um, and they say, well, I'm young and I'm green and I'm stupid. I don't know how to network. Well, okay, well, who did you graduate with? Right, there's your first network. Who did you graduate with? When you look at your graduating class out of high school, I think a lot of us had a pretty good idea of who the successful people were going to be, right? Like I certainly did. I knew, and I looked at, okay, so well, here's the people that I know that are going out of state for university. Here's the people that I know that are really not ambitious, and I kept in contact with a select few of them because I figured in the future we're all going in the same place. I wanted to be a high flying professional. These people are also going that direction. Okay, let's go. Now, I think especially for 18-year-olds, there's this thing of like the high school friend, right? And you say, well, but that's my friend and the friendship is forever. Well, first off, it's not. And secondly, if that friend was a good for you in high school, that doesn't mean they're going to be good for you in your 20s. And having the maturity to let that go because that friendship, that relationship no longer serves you is a part of networking. There are people in your network that you're going to retire. There's people in your network that were good for me in the mortgage industry, but I have not had a reason to talk to a title agent in almost 20 years,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing in my life now or I see on the horizon that title work is going to be something I need, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you're in university, look around at your classes. Who are the kids raising their hands? Who are the kids who are ambitious? Who are the kids who really want to succeed and have a plan? If you look at this person, like, and especially when you're in university, I feel like a lot of, certainly this was me, right? There's a lot of 18-year-olds who think, well, they go for Timon and Pumbaa. They're looking for the, Hakuna Matata. There's no worries. There's no cycle of life. C's get degrees. Bill Gates dropped out of college and look at him, and like as if we're all Bill Gates, right? That person feels good, but they're not a good network point because the only thing they're going to hook you up with is a weed dealer, right? Right. I
Right.
want the kid who is going to go to the library and study because I'm going to raise my level in my network. I'm going to become valuable to them. And so when they get a job, I want to be able to call them up and say, hey, you're working for this company. I would love to work for a company like that. How did you do that? Right.
Mm.
Everybody's vain and they're going to talk to me if they know me. But how do they get to know me? Well, late nights at the library. Does that make sense?
100% it does, yeah. You've said a lot of really interesting things there that I want to touch upon, if I may.
Yeah.
In that I really like what you said about, being 18 or in uni, and it's like, I'm young, I don't know what I'm doing, I haven't got a Scooby about how to network. Well, who did you graduate with? I never considered that. Like, I would say I'm friends with a fair amount of people that, I went to secondary or high school with. And yeah, I've kept in touch with them a few bits over the years, but I never considered that as a network, as a potential network even. And building upon that concept, how do you, even though that network is there, how do you actually solidify it? How do you reach out, so to speak, and start? Is there a correct way essentially to establish a network? Like the people are there, but in your experience, I don't. To me, going up to someone and say, "Do you want to be part of my professional network, or do you want to, you know, um, be chums and stay occasionally in contact?" There's no easy way of saying that, but how do you, in the correct way, establish a good professional network, setting the foundations for the future?
Oh, I love this question. Um, when I so just quick side story. When I moved sides of the table in public accounting, so I got a job in public accounting working for one of the big four, and I worked for Ernst and Young. And I was 35 at the time, which was unheard of. They just like I was told repeatedly, don't try for the big four. No one's going to hire you. But networking is how I got it, right? Yes, I had to have all the other things, top of my class, super ambitious, but networking is really what did it. Um, but when I switched sides of the table and now I was recruiting for Ernst& Young, I had people come up to me and say, "Hey, I would like to be part of your professional network. What's the best way for me to keep in contact with you?" And it was like, yeah, I have no more interest. So like that's a tactic. People do that.
Oh,
It's a
really?
terrible idea. Oh yeah. It's a terrible idea and you shouldn't do that, but people do that. But here's the thing. Somebody who has the spinal fortitude to come up to me and say that to me without laughing, um, I am more likely to remember them.
Yeah.
Right. And I do remember the first student who did that to me when I was recruiting, just simply because I was shocked that that actually occurred.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting a job, I think, with Deloitte, which is one of the other big four. But to answer your question directly, it's all about practicing, right? And I think that there's this idea, and I know for me personally, when I graduated high school, I really thought, and I really had this impression, and maybe it was just like an immature need for the world to be static, right? I had arrived. I had found adulthood. I'm as adult as I'm ever going to be, and there's nothing more to learn. Now I just got to start checking the boxes, get the degree, get the job, and that was completely wrong. You you need to come into this with this idea that like I am an incomplete work, right? Which means that you're going to have to come into it with the idea of like you are going to try this networking thing, and I will promise you you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed, and that has to be okay. So like if you need 10 people in your network that you can rely on to drop a dime to and say, "Hey, I need X, Y, or Z," you need to practice trying to get 100 people, right? Your failure rate is going to be that high. And so it comes down to committing to the reps. And how do you do that? So to answer your question directly is you have to practice, right? You have to practice. You have to take courses. You have to look out the professionals. And if you're at university, so if you have a listener here who's at university, I'm going to give you the best piece of advice on how to practice professional networking that I've ever come across. Whether you have a question or not, go to your professor's office hours, right? Just go. And here's why. Because those professors, they sit in those office, next to no one comes at any time, and they're bored because they can't do their normal work, right?
Yeah.
And so if you go there and just stop in and say, and like literally, you don't even have to have read them. I never read a book in university. Like I'm just going to be Dr. Knox. I know that if Dr. Knox was listening to this, um, Dr. Knox, I'm very sorry. I never read any of your books. But I have an expert level of knowledge in her books. Why? Because I walked in, I opened a page in the book, I found something to talk about, walked into her office hour and said, "Hey, Dr. Knox, I just wanted to chat to you about this idea about the town and gown in Cologne in France, circa 1400s." And then I just shut up, right? And she talked to me the whole hour because she had nothing else to do.
Mm.
Um, and Dr. Knox remembered me, right? She knows me. She knows who I am. She knows I'm interested in her work. I got knowledge and time out of her from that. So it's a good exchange. But like, let's stop and break that down for a second. I found something interesting to her that I engaged on. I engaged in it fully, and I left her with a feeling that I was a great student, that I was really interested in her work, that I was someone she could rely on. Um, so that's the foundation, right? And every one of your professors will do this, right? And if they don't, well, just throw them to the side and move to the next one, right? There's plenty of them. It's a great place to practice. Now, here's the next piece of this, Jonathan, that I think that people forget. Volunteer, right? Dr. Knox is the chair of the history department at Marquette University. On Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday, I'm going to be on an alumni panel for Dr. Knox to talk about how do you get jobs in the current job environment with a history degree, because I have one. That's a relationship that I've kept going for years, but it started with me volunteering to say, "Hey, I do this thing. I'd be happy to help you out. Hey, I'm happy to you having this big speech. I'd be happy to help you with the drinks or usher or whatever." This whole thing is now I'm providing value to her. She sees the value in it for her. I'm interested. and now what's happening? I'm at these conferences. Now there's a whole bunch of PhDs who are all the top in their fields and their various departments. And now I'm in, right? I have the opportunity to talk to the top of the top in the history world, right? Now what do I do? Oh, hey, hi. And I have an opportunity to fail repeatedly talking to these people to figure out which ones are going to be in my network, which ones I want to start to create a relationship with. I'm collecting business cards, and people will say, "Well, I'm not that social, Dylan." Well, neither am I, but I practiced and I was really driven to figure this out, right? And that relationship with Dr. Knox has continued. And the reason I bring that up is down, like, let's flash forward. So I was doing this with Dr. Knox in 2002,
Oh
right?
wow. Okay.
Okay. So I'm doing this with Dr. Knox in 2002. I'm on a panel here in 2021 for her. But here's what happened. I graduated from university in 2004. In 2000 in December of 2006, I realized that the mortgage industry wasn't going to be for me. And I had an opportunity to go back to school and get into the Master's of Education program at Marquette University, right? You follow me?
100%.
The problem is I had 2 days until the application deadline.
Oh wow.
Okay. And I had to get three letters of recommendation. So I literally drove my car. I walked over to the College of Education. I walked in. I told them I'm going to apply. Please expect my application. They laughed at me because there was no professor in the world who was going to give me a letter of recommendation. Now, remember the advice I told you. I went to a ton of professors' office hours and talked to them and learned how to speak their language. I literally walked across the yard in Marquette University into where all of their offices are and just started walking down the hallways. Oh, hi, Dr. Avella. Oh, hi, Dr. Knox. Oh, hi, Dr. Vahil. By the way, I've decided that I really want to give back to my community. I know that education is important to all of you. Can you please write me a letter of recommendation? I need a really good one. And by the way, I need it today. All three of them dropped what they were doing and did it for me.
That's incredible.
Right. But that's in 2006. I got those letters written, metaphorically speaking, in 2002,
Yeah. Yeah. So this
right?
is what so this goes back to what you were saying, how professional networking isn't a quick thing. It's like 10, 15 year um approach. Like I didn't understand the concept then, but it all makes sense now.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, right? And I've kept those contacts, right? Dr. Avella, he's a we're Facebook friends. I chat with him all the time. He's also a priest, so we talk about theological stuff. Um, and Dr. Knox, like I said, in this upcoming Wednesday, I'm going to be on an alumni panel that she asked me to be in because she didn't have anyone else. So she's reciprocating in that networking relationship. Hey, I need a professional, with a history degree. Okay, well, I'm a professional with a history degree. Okay, I'll sit on your panel. I said yes. So when you're establishing those relationships, never pass up an opportunity to volunteer, right? With your friends inside of university. Oh, we're gonna have a party. Hey, I love parties. Like, I'll come on over. What can I bring for you? And work on that friendship, learn that language that they speak, learn, be willing to grow, and also be willing to walk away, right? There are people who, I can think of one very specific case. She was really high flying, got into graduate school, and then decided that she didn't want anything to do with really anything of high level professionalism, went into the volunteer world. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but there was
Yeah.
nothing there for me anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't even know what she's up to at this point, you
Yeah.
know. And it's being willing to walk away and where I put my energy.
Yeah. That's something I want to touch on a little bit later in the chat with knowing when to and use the word retire certain parts of your professional networking because it's not providing value to you. But something I want to touch on in the immediate is from what I've gathered, and correct me if I'm wrong, the key to professional networking is providing value for your connections, but then they provide value back to you so that for example, you as a student couldn't provide a lot of value with the exception of perhaps volunteering and giving a listening ear to your professor. But fast forward 10, 15 years, they provided you immense value with allowing you to get back into university or college at the drop of a hat. So if someone in my audience is potentially in the same boat as yourself of perhaps they're a bit later in life and they want to go back to university or a student or someone who's just starting their professional networking journey, how do you practice giving value? Because obviously that's going to be nuanced person to person, but I feel like a lot of people just assume that if they go up and say, "Will you give me a recommendation? Will you be part of my professional networking?" It's very take take take. There's not a lot of give. Would you say that professional networking is all about giving and receiving value?
I mean, it at its core, that's why you have a network, right? Your network is as strong as the value you can provide to it. Period.
Mm,
And so really it comes down to you have to be a person of value, right? You know, when we talked about the job interview, one of the things that I brought up, and I truly believe this, otherwise I wouldn't have said it, right? Is that you're interviewing for your next job right now and you just don't know it, right? People think, oh, well, it's time to get serious about a career. So now I can start networking. Too late. When I made that switch, there's more to that story of going back into university, Jonathan, because
mm,
here's the other piece. Um, I worked at the Marquette University Department of Public Safety. And I was a student worker. I drove, vans at night to help students get around campus. But I also was in charge of the maintenance for all those vans. And I did, and just exactly what I said in the job interview thing was I did the best job I could. I wanted to be impressive. And so after I got done getting the letters of recommendation to get into this education program in 2006, I knew I needed a job and one that could help me with tuition. So I literally walked from those offices to the Department of Public Safety, and I walked in and I beat on the door because it's locked. You have to be let in. And Lieutenant Jablonski, really tall guy, he comes walking across. He's got a big bald head, kind of goofy looking, and he looks at me and he goes, "Bain," right? And I was just shooting the breeze with him, and and he lets me in, and then there, Dr. Sergeant Kowalski's there, and Lieutenant Berrigan's there, and several of the people I worked with who I knew because I had been doing this maintenance, and I made sure that their squads were always clean, and I made sure that I showed up on time, if not early, for all of my shifts, and eventually was promoted to supervisor. So they all knew me, and I hadn't been there for 2 years, but they were all happy to see me, right? And that's the key. They were happy to see me because while I was there and working on their squads, I'm shooting the breeze. I knew that Jablonski specifically worked on cars, and Lieutenant Berrigan, she was a member of the pipe corps, and she would occasionally wear kilts and walk around with her bagpipes and stuff like that at Irish Fest in Milwaukee.
Mhm.
And so I asked her, "How's your piping going? How's the car project going?" Right? And just shooting the breeze. And then I just offhandedly messaged like, "Hey, I just applied for this program. I'm kind of looking for a job. You guys have any opening?" I was hired that day, Jonathan.
Wow,
Like
that's
the
incredible.
Jablonski literally looked me in the eye and went, "You're hired. Just fill out the application. We'll do the interview, and it's a formality. But can you start on Sunday?"
That's
Right?
insane.
Right? And people looked at when I went, like, so I had less than 48 hours, and I had quit my job in mortgages, gotten a job as a security officer, and gotten into a master's level education program. And I remember at the time, a lot of my friends were like, "My God, like I feel like you just bounced off a wall and went in a different direction." Well, yes, I did, but I had all of these things lined up that I started because I started at the Department of Public Safety in 2000. And
Yeah.
so I worked there from 2000 to 2003, and the whole time made sure I was networking with them and adding that value. They knew me as a person of values, somebody that they could that really brought, raised the level of the people around them. Um, and so that is the power that comes into that network, right? And it's everywhere. It's all around you. Like every single interaction you have, professional or otherwise, is a networking opportunity, right? So if you want, your question really came down to how do you do this? Like how do you practice? Well, for starters, know what you want, right?
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like that I think is like key to everything. Like you got to know what you want. What am I looking at for out of this? So once you know that, right? And for somebody 18, that's huge because a lot of them don't know. So if you don't know, and I'll drop this idea, right? If you don't know what you want, then know who you want to be, right?
Wow, I like that.
Maybe I maybe I don't know that I want to be in like, if you had told me in 2000, oh, you're going to be a CPA working at a power utility, I would have laughed and laughed and laughed, but here I am. And I'm very happy with where I am because I'm a different person than I was at that time. So like, what's the harm in trying to be the best version of yourself? Right? What's the harm if you just try to leave everything better than when you found it? Right? And so if you do that, I really feel that you're going to start adding value and your network's going to start growing. If because here, here's the next piece. You genuinely want other people to win, right? You made the mention of like, oh, well, I'm not really providing anything of value to this professor other than maybe an ear time. Do you know how valuable it is to be listened to? Right?
Well, yeah.
Right? Those professors are sitting there in their concrete boxes, bored out of their mind, thinking that none of their students actually care about the material, this thing that they've dedicated their life to. And now you come in and ask them questions and just legitimately listen to them. I will promise you, you're one of the most valuable students they've ever had. Right?
Wow.
And when you sit there and you talk to a Lieutenant Jablonski or Lieutenant Berrigan, and they're known in the department as kind of like weird. Nobody asked them about their cars or their weird Scottish thing that they're doing, but you do, and you just listen and you talk to them. They suddenly like talking to you. And they'll tell you all sorts of things like, oh, the department's reorganizing and we're going to have to lay some people off. Uh,
Yeah.
or they'll tell you like, oh, well, we're thinking about this. What do you think about this? Right. This is the other thing is that Lieutenant Jablonski, I'd just go in and just try to shoot the breeze with him about some NASCAR race or whatever. And then he would say, hey, as long as I got you here. And that's the key, right? He looked at me and went, oh, here's someone I can use as an advisor. And he was pitching me on, we're going to restructure the student program this way. How do you think the employees will react? Well, now I've just moved from employee to advisor.
Yeah.
You think that had an impact on my network?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And people would say, well, how did you get there? Oh, you're a kiss ass. Well, I really don't care what those other people think about me because they're not invested in wanting to see me win. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing here. Like you have to practice this and you're going to fail a lot. Right. There's going to be people that they're just not going to fit into the network. There's going to, you have to have that personal relationship. And that means that you need to commit to the reps and you need to commit to evolving.
Yeah. That is a very interesting perspective you had there. And I really like what you said about wanting to see the other person win because it it's very wholesome and it's also an organic way to create a network rather than sort of cold calling, oh, by the way, do you want to be part of my professional network? It's like, I don't know who you are and I've no idea what you want. It's, you know, whereas I'll have to accept that I didn't see that angle of, when I said that you're just providing a listening ear. That really challenged me, that question. Do you know how valuable it is to be listened to? That's really changed my perspective on that. Something as simple as being a listening ear or, you know, because what's going through my head at the minute is that, you know, if you're a student or someone who feels like they can't provide value, suddenly you can. Something as simple as asking about someone's hobby and being genuinely interested and wanting to learn about them, providing that listening ear, willing to invest your time and energy in their success. And then because you'll help them succeed, they're going to want to help you succeed as well. And it creates this nice to and fro relationship, which obviously you've seen the fruits of your
Mm.
labor 10, 15 years later. Whereas, someone came in and said, I need to get into this university like today. It's like, no, not a chance, you know. So that's incredible. I mean, like, a professional, this is why professional networking needs to be taught and taught in such a way as this with real world examples, because I think that I'm guilty of this as well, where you think I'll go on LinkedIn, connect with a few people I sort of know, and then, have a chat with them every so often, and that's building a network, so to speak. It's like, no, no, it's not. But whereas what you have done and illustrated here is actual wholesome professional networking that works in the real world. But
Well, how about
sorry,
this,
carry on.
Jonathan? Here's a question.
Yeah.
How do you know when you can count that person in your network? Right? Like, when do
Mm,
you know you've got it? When do you know you can drop a dime? Right? And the answer is when they genuinely laugh with you.
Oh wow.
When you can get somebody to genuinely laugh with you, because the level of relaxation and personal connection required for that is key, right? Um, and that to me is the target, right? I'm not a funny person. My mother likes to introduce me and my brother as here's my youngest son and my wet towel, right? And I'm the oldest, so um but that's a marker, right? When you get this person to genuinely laugh with you and you can genuinely laugh with them, now you've got it. But let me give you an example of like how this can cascade, right? There's a woman at work at my current job, and I've known her for a year, and she's super into food, right? She's a big foodie, and
Yeah.
I love to cook, but I don't like going to restaurants. So we have a disconnect here. But she just loves to try all the new restaurants. Well, I am brand new to this area. I know nothing about the food culture in Denver. Denver, Colorado is where I hail from, which is right smack dab in the middle of the United States.
Mhm.
Um, and so I went on Reddit and I found every food list I could find, and I signed up for all the email lists for all the food critics in Denver. And then the next Friday, hey, have you thought about this restaurant? Oh, there's this new one opening up in the middle of a pandemic. It'd be great to be able to. Are you and your husband interested in Thai Jamaican fusion? Um, and
Right.
she was like, "Whoa, I didn't know that." And so we started talking about all these things, right?
Mm.
And we started talking about food and stuff like that. Now I have no experience with this, and there's a question of like, well, aren't you just faking it, just trying to quote unquote use her? And I'll get back to that in a second. But here's the cascade effect, right? Now I got a couple of friends, they're fully vaccinated. They haven't been to a restaurant over the year, and it's their 20th anniversary.
Mhm.
They're here in the city, and they said, "Oh, I really wish there was a new local restaurant that I could try." Well, what are you into? Oh, well, I really like Jamaican food. Hey, there's a Jamaican Thai place that's just I've heard is amazing because my coworker went to it, told me it was amazing. I recommended it to the coworker. There's that adding value piece. And now because I'm working on that, I am now more valuable piece of that other person's network because he took his wife there and she loved it.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So when you look at this, and people will say they'll bristle at networking opportunities going, wow, that's so much trouble. Like, to me, the trouble is not knowing anything about the world you're living in, right? That's the bigger problem. And so there's a cascade effect inside of networks. It's the idea that like, okay, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, your network is only as strong as the weakest person in it, right? And so if there's that value chain that's going back and forth. And if you don't have that, you don't have a network.
Yeah. That's that's pretty insane. You did say there you would touch on something about people perceiving it as you using people, which I do feel like sometimes, not that I've ever experienced it or obviously done it to anyone, but I do feel like there is maybe a perhaps a slight negative association with networking in that when it comes down to it, you're just using other people to try and get your next job instead of what it actually is, what you described previous of this as this organic relationship providing value to each other. But what was your take on um, the idea that networking in part is just using people?
Well, what's the difference between management and leadership, or manipulation and leadership, right? If I'm going to be a good leader and a good manager, aren't I inherently manipulating my employees to do what I want them to do?
Oh, that's
Right.
an interesting perspective.
Right. So, I mean, when I sat in and I did my MBA years after I was done being a teacher, right? There was a guy in one of these management classes. This guy's talking, and like I was just soaking in this knowledge of how to manage people. Just loved the class. Um, and the there was a guy in the back of class who just stood up and lost his cookies, man. Like he just lost his shit.
All right.
So angry about how this was just a class on manipulation and twisting people around, and he stormed out. This guy's like 30 years old. And the professor had clearly heard this before, right? He stood up there and went, That's a great question. I was wondering who, and he was co-teaching with another person, and the guy walked over and handed him $20. Apparently, they had a bet that it was going to be that guy. Um,
All right.
and and so Dr. Gregory, who is the professor in question, he said, "What is the difference? Let's talk about it." He stopped the whole class, abandoned the whole lesson plan to talk about that very thing. And his viewpoint on it was the difference between management and manipulation is that a good manager, good leadership, has the best interests of all parties at heart. Whereas
Yeah.
manipulation is, I want this for me. And this is the key critical part. When you walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, I would like you to be part of a professional network because I'm looking for a job," that is a one-way street, right?
Hmm.
That I look to extract value from you. The other thing is, you could walk up and say, "Hi, I'm looking in this field, but I really want to know, like, we always talk about work-life balance. How do you balance it so well?" Shut up, right?
Mm.
And so now that they're going to tell you, and because anybody, at least, and I'm specifically referring to public accounting, but this could apply to investment banking, any of the high professional fields, doctors, medical, whatever, any field where there's a lot of work and a lot of stress. Anybody who survived for a long time has a way to do that, and they're proud of it because it's been hard to win. And so you ask them that, they shut up, and this goes back to that listening ear. Take a genuine interest. They're telling you how to be successful in their field. But at the same time, you're also showing them that people actually care about what they do. I'm an auditor. How many people actually care that I go and audit things? Right? I say I'm an auditor, people roll their eyes. Somebody who's interested in me, like, it's like catnip, man. I feel so much better about my job and my profession. I can take pride in what I'm doing when somebody's interested in it. And if that's all you're providing to that network, that's still, like, that's priceless.
Yeah.
And so this goes back to I genuinely want to see them win. I want to find ways that I can add value. I want to, even if that means I have to grow. Well, there's the value to me, right? I have this growth opportunity, but I'm going to step into this place and I'm going to be able to help them out, even if it is with learning those soft skills that are not taught anywhere, right? On how to listen, how to see somebody, how to feel somebody, how to have empathy for their position, how
Yeah.
to actually, like, and like, the practicing the art of listening without having a response is so hard. But you go to these networking events, you go to your professor's office hours, you go to the bar and listen to people, just strike up a conversation with someone at the grocery store. It doesn't matter. All of those are opportunities for you to practice seeing people, listening to people, figuring out what's in it for them. What do they need? Right? I'm here of service. And there's, of course, an enmeshment piece where it could be too bad, right? Where you could be sucked into their needs. You lose a sense of self to them. They're manipulating you. And that's a point where you can just cut them off. This doesn't serve me, right? I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to take that phone call. Oh, well, they're going to trash my reputation in the market. If I'm networking appropriately everywhere else, there's no way they can do that, because someone's going to say, well, oh, well, so and so said Dylan's a bad employee. And my boss would just laugh and laugh and laugh. Right. Um, and it's the same thing when somebody says, well, and I remember this, going back to Dr. Knox. Somebody said, well, like, oh, he thinks he's always right. And Dr. Knox's response was, he doesn't think he's right, but he's very intentional and very intense. She came to my defense.
Yeah.
I didn't ask her to do that, but she did it because we had that relationship.
Yeah. That's leads very nicely on to something that I wanted to ask almost from the start, but I felt it needed a proper place to be inserted into this chat. And that is, so far we've talked about what is professional networking, how to start your professional network, how to provide value, and all this good stuff. But like you said yourself, there comes a point within your professional life that there are certain people within your network that no longer are necessary. And I don't like using that because it makes human beings and people sound disposable, which obviously are not. But with the prime example, you said that an individual within your network decided that they didn't want to be in the professional field. They wanted to do volunteer work, which is very admirable. But that wasn't a line of work that you were willing to go into, so they no longer needed to be part of your network. How do you know when to retire people from your network and dare I say it, tactfully, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, we live in 2021, so ghosting is always an option. Um, you just ghost them like a Tinder date, man. But so to me, I think like I believe that words matter, right? I believe that words matter.
Mhm.
So what's the difference between this person is no longer useful to me and this person has outgrown me,
Oh.
right? So in the case of my friend who went on to do volunteer work, and if she's listening and she knows I'm talking about her, I admire what she does. And she's just incredible. The amount of love and empathy she can have for every human being in this whole world to go do what she does. And I know that I simply don't have the capacity to be in that space.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that she wasn't useful to me. It was that she outgrew me, right? And I want to see her win. So I welcome her growth. We just grew in different directions, and that's okay. Um, and that's a key distinction. And I'll tell you another story that I think will kind of illustrate this point. Let's go back to your OG network, right? Your high school graduating class.
Mhm.
Um, so we're in 2010, and I've just finished my first year in Taiwan, right? I've been there, and so just to give your audience an idea, what had happened was is that the economy had collapsed. I'd gone back to be a teacher. The economy had collapsed in the United States. No one was hiring teachers, but I found a job working at an international school in Taiwan. And so I literally sold everything I had and moved to Taiwan.
All right.
Because I would rather be employed and overseas than unemployed and in my hometown. So I just got up and left because I wanted to be working. I wanted to have this job. And I looked at it and said, hey, I can have a great adventure. I can go see all these stuff. I can learn Chinese, like all the things.
Mhm.
But I came back and my wife was in Taiwan with me and she was flying back, but her flight was like 2 days after mine. So I had like this 2 day lag period. And I went to this bar right on the shores of Lake Michigan in my hometown. And all I wanted to do was get some bar food, a beer, and read my book. That's it. That's all I wanted to do. But when I walked in, half of my graduating class was in there. And I had a really small school. So we're talking like 30 people.
All
Okay.
right.
And half of them were there, and I walked in and you would have thought it was like my 100th birthday, like people like, oh my god, Dylan's here, I haven't seen you in forever, like, and it was like they're buying me beers. Like my whole plan of just eating, drinking, and reading was gone. And like I ended up having to call a cab to go home because people kept being like, we should do a shot, like,
Yeah.
and what are you up to? And what I heard repeatedly, Jonathan, when I told them like, oh yeah, well, can't find a job, so I went overseas, I was like, you're so lucky.
All right.
You're so lucky. Oh my God, I could never do that. Oh, you've always been adventurous. I wasn't. Um, right? I was for all intents and purposes an economic refugee. And these people were sitting there telling me, like, you're so incredible. You're so wonderful. Pats on the back. Oh, I so admire you. I suddenly went from like, we didn't like each other in high school to now they're admiring me. Like, this was this bizarre world. And I realized in that moment that I had outgrown my hometown.
Yeah.
Like all of those roots that I had going back the 120 years my family has lived there is gone. There is nothing here that I'm ever going to be able to leverage because everybody, like, the highest thing is to own the small town accounting firm in the professional world, right? Like that's it. There's nothing more. Um, and to realize that I had outgrown this part of my life and there's no way I could ever go back was a sorrowful thing, but a liberating thing because it gave me freedom to go anywhere. And since then, I've been all over the United States, wherever the best opportunity is. But from a networking standpoint, everybody who was in the bar that night got retired
Oh wow. Okay.
because there was nothing more that we had grown in different directions. And it's not to say that they aren't great. They are. It's not to say I don't spend time with them. I do. When I go back home, I try to look them up and try to go out and have a couple of laughs, a couple of brews, a couple of slaps on the back, and slaps on the knee, right? Like, but the reality is that from a professional standpoint, I don't bother to talk about it anymore because there's not a whole lot there for me.
Yeah. That is that's interesting. I would say I've experienced that to a certain degree, in that, I went and joined the maritime industry, went on to do engineering, and I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world. But at this point, if I was to leave my job, I would have no intention of coming back home to my hometown. As much as I love it, the lack of opportunities, and I'm just more ambitious, quite frankly, than I feel like a lot of people are. And yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely outgrown certain people within my networks at home, and in the past 2 or 3 years expanded my network, thankfully, to the point that I could go and work, further afield in Europe or even America, and it's just interesting in that you've I think the weird part of it and the hard part of it is that in some ways you've potentially worked really, really hard to foster this relationship within a professional network. And then there comes that difficult point where you know that it's time to retire it. It's you've both provided the maximum amount of value that you can for each other, but knowing that time when to retire it is it's a tough one, isn't it? And it's a tough choice. But I suppose what I would like to ask is that we've covered quite a lot with professional networking and like how to do it, what it is, all that. But what resources do you use personally? Like, so for example, the big obvious one is LinkedIn. But do you know of, or would you advise any other resources that somebody could use to enhance or build upon their professional network?
I'll answer that in a second, but I do want to touch on one thing you just said. Um, you might have worked hard to establish relationships,
Yeah.
but you're never going to get that cost back. It's sunk. It's called a sunk cost. It's gone.
Okay.
So when it's time, just walk away. Like you don't waste your time thinking about all the things you did to get there. Just move on. That's harder. If you figure out how to do that easily, you call me and let me know. But you keep that in mind, right? Like the cost is sunk. It's over. It's done with. There's nothing more that you can do. And it's a sad thing, but you're, as you said, you're ambitious. You're growing. That's where you're people will come into your life. People will leave your life. And that's okay. Like I want your audience to know that's okay. That's part of how this works. And I also want your audience to go back and listen to your interview with Colt Gordan, because Colt likes to talk a lot about when you start changing, when you start living to your higher self, everyone in your life will make three things will happen, right? They're going to resist, then they're going to demand you change back, and then they're going to demand you change back or else. And as you network, as you move up, your friends, quote unquote, are going to do that to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do that to you. And they're going to tell you that no, you shouldn't do that. They're going to tell you don't go to that networking event. No, don't read that book, or that book is stupid. Because you asked me about resources, and I heard this a lot. That book is stupid.
Right.
That book has no, or they'll tell you all the reasons things won't work. That's part of that second step, resistance. And then here's the next one, when they sit there and go, "You've changed." Well, I'll like that's always an emotional shock, a psychological shock. I'm going to give your audience exactly what you should say back to that. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You've changed. Isn't that why I'm doing what I'm doing? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Resources. Um, the biggest things I'll say with resources are, there's a couple of books in the United States that are pretty high level that I learned. Mr. Schmooze is a great book. And Schmooze is Smooze. Is a great book. It's all about how to like talk to people, how to actually interact with them. It's not directly on networking, but it really is on how to actually like interact with somebody. There's
Yeah.
another book called How to Be a Rainmaker that talks about sales. And like one of the biggest advices, pieces of advice in that book is that lunch is never lunch. Lunch is a sales opportunity. Well, it's also a
All
networking
right.
opportunity too, right? Don't go to lunch with somebody if you don't know why you're there, right? So you're like, well, but I'm going with my friend. Well, okay, well then why are you there? You're there to deepen that friendship. Like, don't tell me you don't know why you're there. You know why you're there. And if your answer is I'm hungry, wrong answer. Um, so those two books I found to be horrendously useful to me. I would really say that the biggest things and tools and resources for networking are any of the opportunities you have to be around people that are above your level. So, office happy hours, go to a happy hour. So if you're working in a professional field, or you're at a university where they're having networking events, go talk to the person who organized the event, figure out who is going to be there, and then target that person and make sure you're going to figure out, like, let me give you an example. When I would go to networking events, I talked to the woman at the career development office about who she invited, who's going to be there. Oh, this person from EY is there. Okay. I want to find out what their favorite golf course is, right? Flat out. And I would work on practicing the conversations until I could until I could move the conversation to golf. I had to learn about golf. I had to learn about the PGA Tour. I had to learn
Yeah.
about the Waste Management Open. And then I eventually found out that his favorite golf course is in Castle Rock. So, it's those are the bigger resources. You can start with Mr. Smooths or How to Be a Rainmaker. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People is a phenomenally great book. If you're at a university where they're having a workshop, and this is another a key point. If you're at a university, this is the easiest thing in the world to learn, because they're going to have workshops all over the place. And so go invest in yourself, spend the money, right? Like, if I look at the amount of money that I've been able to make with my network, the $2,000 I spent on sales training when I was in the mortgage industry seemed like huge at the time. And it has literally paid off every day of my life since.
Yeah.
So, it's paid off. I mean, my wife's very first job that she got out of university was because of my network,
Oh,
right?
wow. There you go.
It's not like your network expands. Now I'm adding value to my wife. Then here's the deal. My wife got into that utility space. She learned this. She networked really well. So when I wanted to get into the utility space, I turned to her and said, "Who do you know?" She said, "Here, go talk to these 3 people," and they helped me prep for my interview, so I could nail my interview to get into this utility space. Like,
That's an
I
incredible story.
like this is the thing, Jonathan, is that people always want to say, "Oh, I can be a LinkedIn Prime member," and LinkedIn would love you to believe that. In the same way, a casino would really love you to believe you can double your money at the slot machine, right? It looks nice. It's a tool, but you got to go practice. You got to go find the opportunities, and the opportunities are everywhere.
Yeah. That that little segment there is just, I picked up so much in it. I really like what you said as well before about outgrowing your network, or your current network, and moving into a new sphere of influence. And I really like that you're quite bold in that don't be afraid to grow. And for those wondering, the episode that Dylan is referencing is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And another, uh, I feel like worth letting the audience know, is that Dylan and Colt actually have their own podcast together, Knights and Dragons, which is very, very good and covers a lot of topics. So if you're enjoying this episode, this is just 50% of what that show's got. And with Colt's background in being a therapist, it's a fantastic show. I really enjoy it. So check that out. And also, coming back to what you were saying about finding out exactly who's going to be at these conferences, and investing not only in knowing them, but when you say that you invested in yourself, that $2,000 sales course, I feel like a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They'll see a price tag on something and go, that's steep. But then they don't see the long term gain in that. I think it's kind of the same with, you go to university, and in the short term, it's like, I'm not going to see the benefit of this. It's longer term when you can have that on your CV, and later down the line, it makes you more eligible for jobs and such things. But
It's all dependent. I know we're coming up on time, but I really feel you're starting to hit on the pay dirt gold here, right?
yeah, yeah, go as long as you
Um,
need to. I'm more than happy to. I could listen to you all day.
oh, well, that makes one person in the world. I'm happy. Um, but let's just unpack that. You
Yeah.
mind if I get a little vulnerable in your
No,
podcast?
no,
I don't
no,
think
no, please. Yeah.
now here's the thing. I knew you were going to say yes because no one ever says no, right?
Oh, okay.
Right, but that's a networking skill, isn't it? Because people like authentic people,
Oh,
right?
100%.
And so when we're talking about like, oh, how, there's these cascade effects. The only reason I could go to the career development office and be able to ask the woman who organized that event who's going to be there, and she would took the time to look it up, stopped what she was doing, and looked it up for me, was because I had been going there every single day for 2 years.
Mm.
Right. And asking her about her kids. Oh, her kid is having trouble with math. I'm a math teacher. I tutored her son in calculus for free. Um, she helped me with her resume. And oh, by the way, while she's having a resume, I told her about my sons, or I don't have sons, my daughters, and my dreams for them, and how getting a new job in this field was going to open up these economic opportunities. And I would love to take them on trail rides and send them to summer camp. And we're eventually going to have a house with a yard and a garden. I shared my dream with her,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I got vulnerable. I got open. I connected with her. She told me about her fears with the department, and how people try to take what she does and claim it as their own all the time. And she started asking, like, but I had established that relationship over 2 years that gave me the jumping off point to figure out what are the partners from these firms, the people who own them, who are they? Oh, and by the way, she told me everything she knew about them too.
Oh, right. Okay.
So like I walk up and I say, hey, I am so excited to see you. I understand that your favorite class when you were here at university was this class. And like that guy, if I had slapped him, he would have been less surprised. And he just looked at me and went, "How did you know that?" And I was like, I'm in that class right now, and I got to tell you, I love it too. And we're working on this case study, and like we just shot the shit about technical accounting for like an hour, right? But he loved technical accounting. It was like his baby. By the end of the night, he said, we're actually hiring for a financial analyst. Do you want to apply?
Wow. Just offered a
Right?
job there and then.
Right. Because it just comes down to it that you have these relationships. But I want to talk about that money investment piece. And this is where I'm going to get vulnerable. I told you I have a hard stop 5 hours from now because this
Yeah.
is the morning for me. I don't know what
Yeah.
time it is for you. But that hard stop is uh, the first round of relationship coaching that my wife and I are doing.
Okay.
It is the most expensive, uh, like professional development type of thing I've ever spent money on.
Yeah.
Like it is insane the level of money that I'm spending on this, and like I struggle with. I mean, I'm more financially successful now than I ever have been in my life. I have more money than I've ever had before, and I'm still sitting here going like 2 years ago that would have been a devastating amount of money, and now I'm struggling with it. But here's the question, Jonathan: is the money I'm going to spend here, if I learn how to be more emotional, more in touch, how I can see other people, how I can be seen by other people, how I can relate on an emotional and a true authentic level with my wife. But of course, that's going to translate into how I can show up for other people, right? It's not
Yeah.
just me and her. There's, no man is an island. How much more money am I going to earn with that? Or more to the point, and here's the real kicker: isn't it going to be cheaper than a divorce?
Yeah. Wow. That's
Right?
yeah. That's some seriously interesting stuff right there. And I just want to say as well, kudos to you for, that's going to be hard work going
Oh,
going through a course like that. And I mean, I think, I can speak hopefully for the both of us in that blokes we're not the best at maybe giving up the whole feelings thing. And I'll figure a way out. Perhaps figuring a way out of this problem is not it. Maybe you just need to sit down and actually chat about your emotions, which is why I'm going to enjoy having Colt back on the podcast at some point, because that mental health episode I done has been my most popular episode to date, um, and I feel like you've masterfully tied in the this notion of somehow of essentially going to this counseling and this relationship course, for my lack of a description, is going to not only make you a better husband and improve your relationship, but it's also going to improve your relationship with your professional network. I
Mm-hmm.
think you've done a masterful job of like tying those two in. And maybe that even brings up something that I wasn't even going to talk about, but I've just thought about it. Perhaps, you know, something even that's worth, before you even try to build a professional network, perhaps maybe build yourself up. Maybe
Oh
get
yeah.
get your focus on yourself first, and making sure that you're right with yourself and you're ready to go, and you're I'm not ashamed to say that as a bloke I've went to therapy, and the only, if I could give one bit of advice to my 18-year-old self, it would have been go to therapy, swallow your pride, go to therapy. Like, there's a healing power in therapy, and that would have saved me years of grief and hassle and drama. But at the same time, saving on those, that hassle, grief and drama, I now looking back at it right now in this moment, like, my professional network would be completely different. It would be a lot better,
Yeah.
and my relationships in general would be better. But sorry, go on.
Well, let's just talk to your audience for a second, though.
Yeah.
Right, Jonathan? You, I'm gonna ask you a question. So we're flipping the script. I'm gonna interview you.
Oh, here we
Um,
go.
do you consider yourself an ambitious, high achieving man?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here's our second question. Do you consider me to be the same?
Yes, very much so.
And now, here's a common denominator. There's a lot of things we have in common, but here's one: we both have gone to therapy.
Yeah.
Right. I want to speak directly to your audience, particularly for the young men at 18. Dude, you do not have it figured out.
Preach.
Like, like, get off your high horse. Your ego is your enemy. There's a book. It's by Ryan Holiday called The Ego is the Enemy. Go read it. It's required reading if you're 18-year-old male. And I will tell you that, like, emotions, professional networking, budgeting, these are not normal things. Unless it's the 4 F's of life, right? Fight, flight, feeding, and reproduction. Like, unless it's those 4 F's, it's not a natural thing that we should know how to do. Period. End of statement. Everything about the modern economy, like, stop and think about what was our professional network 3,000 years ago. It was our little village that we spent our entire time in, that had thousands of lore. And this is why you respected your elders, because they could teach you those lessons about, hey, get your head out of your ass, young man, and actually, like, deal with your wife on an emotional level. You had access to those things. Your network, your whole world was that village.
Mm.
We don't live there anymore, and we're never going to live there again. And the reality here is, rely on professionals to do what professionals do. I'm looking at this coaching class, and I consider myself to be a high achieving man. Like, I added $60,000 to my net worth last year without really trying. Right. Like, I have gone from being on benefit, I think is what you call it. Welfare is what they
Yeah.
call it in the States.
Yeah.
I was on welfare in the United States, not making enough money to feed my family, going further into debt every single month, 5 years ago, 6 years ago now at this point, to I have a positive net worth that is increasing by multiple thousands of dollars every single month. Right. That is what I've been able to achieve. And what have I been able to do? I used my networking, I've used my sales skills, I've used, my soul, I've used my drive, and I've hit this level. And this is true. And I think it starts when you're born, but when you're 18, you like, it's a sudden jolt for you that, oh, I'm in a new level, right? When like, stop and think. I don't know what high school graduations or secondary graduations look like for you overseas, but in the United States, invariably, somebody gets up at the microphone during a high school graduation and says, "Congratulations, you made it." But they never answer where we made it to. And
Oh
the way
wow,
where
that's
you
a
made it
powerful
to,
question.
where you made it to, is the starting line. So you better lace up your shoes and be ready to run, because there's a whole bunch of, like, you're like, you might be a small town high school valedictorian, but you go to university, you're at the bottom of the heap, man. And you got to be running, you got to be growing, you got to be looking out. And you know what? You're going to have to learn new languages. Not Chinese, but, like, think about how somebody in a machine shop talks versus the people who are the executives of the company. It's
Oh,
a
very good
completely
point.
different language, right? you're going to have to grow. One of my great powers is that I pick up and adopt people's languages really quickly because I'm really highly skilled with languages. So I can sound like anybody pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
And that means that I can relate to them. Bill Clinton, who was a politician in the United States, his power was not just saying, I feel your pain, but it was, I feel your pain. I feel your pain, right? His his accent changed based upon where he was giving speeches,
Oh, right.
right? So like it was the fact that everybody heard what they saw at the kitchen table. And so when we're talking about developing yourself, like, no, you should go do it. If that $2,000 was going to mean anything, it wasn't. I needed that person to help teach me how to be a good salesman, but I'm the one who then took it and did something with it. It was never his responsibility to actually turn me into a good salesman. It was my responsibility to take those things and actually make action. And this is the same thing here. I've come as far as I can go with my current set of tools. My marriage has come as far as it can go. And like so many other marriages, I've been married to my wife for, over 11 years at this point. I love her dearly, but our relationship has matured to the level it can with our current tools, right? I've never been in a marriage where I've had 2 kids, a career, and bought a house before, right? Why would I know how to handle that?
Yeah.
why would I know how to handle that? Why would I know how it is to be approaching my 40s? How would I know what it is? Well, I'll tell you how I would have known. I would have talked to my dad, but my dad lives on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
So when I sit here and I say, well, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to get smarter, to learn and to grow, and I'm going to look at this. I'm going to go to this relationship coaching. It scares the living tar out of me because I don't like being seen. I don't want to be seen. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, from a networking standpoint, and like I'm watching you squirm in your chair, man. um, but from a networking standpoint, which is our topic, think about that. The people who have those magnetic personalities, they're the ones who see you, and
Yeah.
they're the ones that let you see them. Now, how much more strong will I be in everything I try to do if I can learn to be a more emotionally competent person?
Yeah. But say that louder for all the guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I'll say it. I'll directly say it to the guys. Your advice to your 18-year-old self was go to therapy. My advice to my 18-year-old self was listen to Jonathan. Right? Like you sort yourself out first. We started off this whole thing by talking about you need to know what you want. Well, if you're not able to deal with your inner self, if you don't know why you react to certain things, I mean, Colt and I did on Knights and Dragons the whole thing on non-reactivity with politics. If you don't know why you have your political views, if you don't know why you feel hold these truths, if you don't know why you get so upset, well, that's right where you need to look, right? And a professional can help you sort that out.
Yeah. And I think that that ties in nicely with the quote from, I think it was one of the Stoic emperors, the Roman emperors, who said, such a simple thing, it was know thyself. And that's very powerful, isn't it? Because if you know
Yeah.
thyself, it ties in nicely with what you want, or at least who you want to be if you don't know what you want. And then you can wholesomely give value to build up your network. Your network will give value back to you and vice versa, and you'll achieve where you want to go. And I think, that ties in nicely, really, to summarize the whole subject, to give value, and you will receive value as well. It's that two-way relationship. But I think we'll call it a day there, unless you have any other little nuggets of gold you would like to deliver to the audience.
You know what? We can call it there. I mean, this topic connects to everything, and I think a podcast like yours is so valuable when you're touching on all these different things because nothing is a separate thing,
Yeah.
right? And I love that you brought in mental health. I love that we talked about therapy. Like stop and think about it. We're talking about therapy and how it relates to networking, which relates to job interviews, which relates to relationships, it all relates.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat because it's so multifaceted, isn't it? Like, everything is connected in that regard, and yeah, it's so powerful when we can have these conversations. It's just a shame I didn't have this conversation when I was in high school. You know what I mean? It's such a valuable thing that we all need to learn, but instead we're taught Pythagoras theorem. Um, and while that's very, very useful as an engineer, I can testify that Pythagoras theorem is definitely useful. It doesn't help, when I'm trying to, search for a new job or do well in a job interview or, enhance my network. And I think we've covered on the side of networking both our personal networks, which we can give value and receive value, and our professional network as well. But yeah, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation, and unfortunately, we do have to call it a day there. But you'll be glad to know that Dylan will be back on the podcast again at some point. And if you have really enjoyed this conversation, Dylan does have his own podcast. So, where can the audience find you if they want to hear more about you, Dylan?
You can find me at fiscallysavage.com. It's a podcast focusing all on personal finance and how you can get a control of your finances. So you can find podcast website, they're the same name, Fiscally Savage.
Fantastic. And don't forget to check out his joint podcast with Colt Gordan, Knights and Dragons, which touches on some of the subjects which we discussed in the latter part of this podcast, which is very, very good. I highly recommend it. But once again, Dylan, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
My pleasure.